good quality of life for people with disabilities doesn't just happen by accident. There's a long history of provision for people with disabilities that pretty much tells us how things will work out if things are left to chance or to existing human service systems. It may happen for particular individuals as a result of a clear vision and determined action. And it's that vision of a better life that will actually make the difference. Now, some people actually hear the word vision and they think it sounds a little bit, evangelistic. Hallelujah, I've had a vision. To me, it doesn't mean anything like that. It means having a very clear idea and some positive dreams about what we want for somebody's life. All of us dream all the time for ourselves and for the people that we care about. But sometimes some of those dreams are so basic and so fundamental that we hardly even bother to articulate them clearly. However, when most people are asked about what kinds of things they think are the basic elements of what they would say is, good quality of life, they usually say very similar things like relationships with, friends, acquaintances, and having people that actually care about us. Having a place that you feel reflects who you are and is your private space that gives you a sense of security. Opportunities to pursue skills or interests and to actually choose the things that you like to do and to have opportunities to do those things. They talk about making a contribution and being seen by other people as having gifts to bring to others. To a certain extent, they talk about, having enough money to live in security, not living in poverty, and ideally having good health. And if these are some of the things that most people kind of identify as being contributors to good quality of life, we could say that they're actually pretty ordinary dreams. They're pretty everyday things. And having a vision for a person with a disability, for me anyway, is really about claiming for that person the right to the same kind of ordinary everyday dreams that most people hold dear. So put simply, it means believing that a person with a disability can have the same kinds of dreams and will need the same kinds of things in their lives that other people do. A visional reflective view of what is possible for people with disabilities that reflects quite an altered mindset from what's commonly out there in our community. From birth, the idea of separate paths can become quite entrenched for people with disabilities. The typical kid in the neighbourhood might go off to preschool, playgroup, go off and play in the park. A child with a disability might find their early years filled with things like early intervention and therapy. Adults might attend workplaces, they might socialise with their co-workers, they might join sporting teams and have people over for barbecues and that kind of thing, whereas an adult with a disability may spend their lives in congregate care facilities, attending work training programs or independent living programs. And these essentially separate paths can be maintained throughout life and can be seen by many people to be the inevitable reality for people with disabilities. So people with disabilities end up congregated together and they end up in disability-specific programs and separate from the rest of the community. And all glimpse of what's going on in that other land, in the schools, the shops, the workplaces, the clubs, the pubs, the universities, the teams, all of that's closed off. And the wider community's opportunities to know people with disabilities as neighbours and friends and workmates are also perhaps closed off for people. There's something that happens to our thinking where disability is concerned. We seem to think differently. When my son was young, I was urged again and again to take him off to riding for the disabled. I had to point out again and again that my son was actually terrified of horses and really disliked riding. But people were convinced, that if he got used to it, he'd really enjoy it. Now, I hate flying. No one has ever suggested to me that I should join an aero club. And that once I got used to it, it's a great experience, wonderful opportunity I'm missing out on. But there's a difference in the way we think about activities and places that are appropriate for people with a disability. I've actually had some quite strange looks recently when I've started to tell people that I'd like Alex to join some woodworking groups when he leaves school, because he loves woodwork. And he might not have a great deal of language, but he talks constantly about going to woodwork. Now, the strange looks that I get are because people understand that Alex probably won't do very much of the woodworking. He won't know how to use the machines. And he would probably need very, very substantial support to fulfil any part of that role. But I could point out, of course, that riding for the disabled, he wouldn't be on the horse on his own. He'd have somebody riding the horse or guiding the horse or helping him stay on the horse. The difference is riding for the disabled is a disability-specific environment, so people automatically accept Alex can be there. It wouldn't be a natural environment for him. He hates horses. The woodworking group is a much more natural environment for him, however, because he loves the machine and, even with very limited language, expressed a direct desire to be there. Now, he could be just as easily supported there as he could be at riding for the disabled. But because the environment hasn't been specially set up for a person with a disability, it's much more difficult for people to get their heads around. So what happens is society's expectations about where people with disabilities can be and where the support can be delivered starts to impact on people's whole lives and experiences. So people's actual interests or desires become irrelevant when we've already determined the places they can be. When we start developing a vision, we shouldn't be automatically placing limitations on the ideas that people might have around where people could go or the things that they could do. And that around the world we are seeing individuals with all kinds and levels of disability having work and living in their own homes and enjoying social connections and the other ordinary things that other people see as the important elements of a good life. Now, I think it's really imperative for every one of us here to actually believe that that is possible, because articulating that vision of those possibilities is the necessary first step. What does this person want? You know, some people with disabilities may be able to actually articulate some of their own goals with help and support. Other people may just need a little bit of guidance about the things that they might choose. So you could start with just some of those general core issues of the things that we think make up a good life, but you could also start to explore possibilities in much more individual detail around a particular person. Looking at what kinds of things you're going to try and bring into a person's life, who might help, how will you go about it, when, what will you need to do, and so on. And for many people, it will be actually quite helpful to write down a vision statement. I know we did this with our family, and it doesn't seem like it's such an important step, but Alex was unable to articulate his dreams, so we started with the things that we know most people, value in their lives. But it was actually quite surprising the effect of formalising that by writing it down. It really made us clarify our thinking, and it made us make sure that we had shared ideas about what we were about. And it also helped us with the next stage, which is communicating the vision to other people and enlisting support from others. So when we first did this, Alex was very little. Many of the statements were very general things like, we want Alex involved with lots of different people, and we don't want him to be lonely or isolated. We want him to have friends and acquaintances like other people. And we wrote things like, we want Alex to be seen as a person with an individual personality, strengths as well as needs, and gifts to bring to others. It was a big part of our vision from an early time that Alex be known as Alex Strove, not another person with a disability amongst a group of people with disabilities. And for us, articulating that part of our vision, writing that down, has led us to choices where Alex is met as an individual and not considered in the context of other people with disabilities. So when it came to choices, did we want early intervention delivered in a segregated service, or did we want him to receive whatever service were appropriate to him to get the best experience out of preschool and delivered in a preschool setting? The choice for us was obvious, it was the second. Did we want him enrolled in a special school, early enrolment at the age of 4? No, but perhaps some extra time at preschool and lots of orientation and a tailored approach to getting into school, that would work. Because the choices that you actually make are facilitated by the clarity of your vision. And so after putting our vision for Alex on paper, we began to talk to people that we knew might be significant in our journey with him. So we started to tell people like my parents, who thought we were lunatics, about our vision for Alex going to, the regular class in an ordinary school and that kind of thing. And they almost, I think, felt compelled to drag us into their previous generation's tragic model of disability. But if you're absolutely crystal clear in what you want and you articulate that vision every time the opportunity arises, people do come to understand that you're after a good life. I know we might quite often have said things like, I don't know how we're going to get there yet. But people have always known where we're heading, what we're aiming for. I think most people here have probably at some stage had to justify the choices that they've made to others. But in having a very clear vision, you can consistently communicate that direction that you're going in. As Alex progressed through school, some people began to just simply understand the kinds of things that we would and wouldn't find acceptable. At a recent meeting in our school, the principal asked what we saw Alex doing after he leaves school next year. I didn't have a chance to say anything before a woman from the Department of Education piped up and said, well, I assume he's going to be out in the community pursuing the things he's interested in, doing and learning with the support that he needs. I looked at my husband. He looked at me. We didn't know this woman. We hadn't spoken to her. We thought it was fairly exceptional. She knew of our vision even if she didn't know us and she didn't know Alex. And she had just articulated what was the expectation. Another thing that happens is that some unlikely people can come on board, and sometimes the people you expect to be your supporters and the people who are going to be there for you aren't. So a parent might know, for example, that they might want their child in a regular class, for instance, but face a wall of professionals that says, no, the support unit's over there. Or a person wanting tailored support for a young person in the community might find that the only provision is a congregated adult day centre in their town. So it's vital for us to recognise that if we do seek a good life or an ordinary life for people with disabilities, we are moving against a powerful societal current that will constantly try to drag you back to the separate path that is deemed inevitable for people with disabilities. And that set path is limiting, where your vision is enabling. Clarity of vision allows us to evaluate choices that may be placed before us. So you get to ask a simple question of things. Will this bring the person closer to the desired outcomes? If I was evaluating that choice of riding the disabled, I would say that's not a grouping that is going to work for Alex, and it's also not pursuing his interests. At pivotal points in a person's life, it might actually be a good idea to kind of re-examine and reassess what you're doing. None of our fundamentals for Alex have ever changed. We certainly see areas from time to time where we need to redouble our efforts, or we need to maybe reassess a choice that we've made that hasn't been working so well. So vision is not a static thing, it's an evolving, ongoing thing. At present, we're seriously thinking about life beyond school. In our vision, if Alex is going to have a life that includes a lot of freely given relationships with people and that they get to know him as Alex instead of any old person with a disability, it becomes crystal clear for us that as he's on the brink of leaving school, he must, despite his level of disability, be joining in with other people in the ordinary community activities, sharing the things that interest them. So we'll be asking things like, what does he like? Where will he meet people who share his interests? If we can bring people into his life through some work role, then he needs to have one. What could that be? Could we start a small business? Now, these are fundamentally different questions from what program exists. Programs and services are not the answer. Programs and services may provide some funds and some supports, but they cannot alone result in the kind of life you want. Unfortunately, for many people with disabilities, programs and services supplant their lives. People end up having nothing else in their daily lives. They have programs instead of a life. Without a vision of a positive and varied and rich life as a guide, families can unfortunately misdirect their energies, insisting that more funding, more services, more programs are what is needed for people with disabilities. But as they're commonly delivered, these things drive out a person's vision. They drive out any hope of dreams and the involvement of families and the building of a natural supportive community around the person. Then, of course, they're seen to need more programs and more services to fill up the gaps in their life where they're disconnected. And it can be a really vicious circle. It'll be what your vision actually makes of those services, or in spite of those services, or even without those services, that makes the difference. And many people who have achieved supported lives in the community have done so in spite of the services provided rather than as a result of them. We get lots of advice all the time, often loaded with professional opinion and limiting statements about the nature of a person's capacity. But it's the clarity of our vision that allows us to see through some of this. Sometimes the obstacles in the way will be massive and you can't move forward in the direction that your compass is indicating, and you may be forced to divert. A vision alone cannot guarantee anything. It must be accompanied by constant vigilance and lots of work to keep it on track. When you're choosing inclusion, you are choosing the more difficult path. There are always going to be times when obstacles are placed in the way. It doesn't mean you ditch the vision. It means that you need it more than ever to work out other paths to get to the outcomes, and it means work. People with disabilities and families, I think, are in the best position to consistently articulate a vision. Others, like workers or professionals, are likely to get bogged down in day-to-day organisational aspects of the work, and their loyalties may be divided. But people with disabilities and families can have their eyes on the compass. And the vision keeps the destination in mind. The vision can't be used on its own. It must be used to examine choices, to bring people in to help, to provide guidance around barriers, to reject inappropriate choices and to work against opposition. The leap of faith, the trial and error and thinking differently and the determined pursuit of that got people into better situations where waiting for a service to provide something would see you reach 100 years old and never get it. You may receive little encouragement and even some derision. And at times of difficulty, the clarity of your vision can be a source of inspiration to you and something to steel your resolve. You need to find others who share your vision. What can be so wrong about wanting a good life for a person with a disability? Wanting the same ordinary things that everybody else has? Remind yourself that it is being achieved for people around the world, and we know that there are people living much richer and rewarding lives. So if this is what you really want and you believe it is possible, you have yourself a real authentic compass. It'll point to that which you most want, and it's a reliable means of charting your course.